Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Zen Business Podcast. My name is Simon Bell, and joining us today is Associate Professor Dr. Craig Hassard. Dr. Hassard is a senior lecturer at the Department of General Practice at Monash University, where he's been teaching both undergraduate and postgraduate levels since 1989. He's also the coordinator of several mindfulness programs, one of which being Mindfulness for Wellbeing in Peak Performance, which has had more than 400,000 students participate worldwide. His teaching, research, and clinical interests include mindfulness-based stress management, mind-body medicine, and meditation, to name a few, and was the founding president of the Australian Teachers of Meditation Association. Dr. Hassard has also published 10 books and has made several television and documentary appearances. Dr. Hassard, thanks for being on the Zen Business Podcast.
It's excellent to be with you, Simon.
I'm excited to have you on the show to discuss a heap of things, actually. You've got your body of work around mind-body connection, mindfulness, epigenetics, and their impact on peak performance and overall well-being. And I thought we could dive straight in to discuss your work around mind-body connection, if that's okay.
Yeah.
My question is, how much influence does the mind have over one's physical health and well-being?
I think it's the most important thing. What I mean by that is that our mental state, whether we're stressed or angry or, whatever mental, emotional state we have, has direct effects on our body. So it works its way all through our system and right down to our DNA of our cells. But the second thing is that it's the mind that determines what kind of lifestyle we lead as well. So it determines whether or not we get up and do some physical exercise, or what we eat, whether we smoke or use drugs or not. So all of these other things that influence our health are really determined by our state of mind. And if we're stressed and, not coping well, etc., a lot of demands, that means we're much more likely to lead an unhealthy lifestyle as well. And nearly all of the major burdens of disease in developed countries, and increasingly in developing countries, are lifestyle related. So there's a direct effect of the mind on the body, and then there's the indirect effect because it influences how we live. And so if you put all of that together, it pretty much is 90% of what makes us ill.
And I thought this might be a great segue into the epigenetics piece, because the term epigenetics has come across my radar more and more frequently over the last couple of months. It's for probably obvious reasons. It's presenting itself to me. So when I saw your work, and you've got a book that's called Playing the Genetic Hand Life Dealt You, Epigenetics and How to Keep Ourselves Healthy, which you can buy on Amazon. I thought we could just explore that. And firstly, what is epigenetics, and how does that have an impact on our overall well-being and again, peak performance?
Yes, well, when people discovered the DNA and then worked out the sequence of DNA, and that these strands, long molecules, were in the nucleus of our cells, and that each segment of DNA coded for a particular protein and all sorts of traits in our body. That's all coded in our DNA. So there it is, it's all written in the DNA. End of story. So that was the age of genetics. And in the last century, it was pretty much whatever's written into your DNA, that's what's going to happen. But we've understood that you can have things coded into your DNA and they may never play out, or they might play out. And you might have a risk of a certain illness, but how you live influences whether or not that illness starts to express itself. So although you can have a genetic disposition to an illness, how you live, what you do, how you think will actually change the way that your DNA expresses itself. So you've got the DNA, this long coiled up molecule, but around it you've got all of these other molecules switching on, switching off, unraveling, raveling up, putting away, bringing out genes, producing a protein, switching that protein off, switching on that hormone, switching that one off. So we actually realize now that the way our DNA is expressing itself is changing every moment, every day. And in fact, the things that your grandparents did, your great-grandparents did, how they lived, what they ate, did they smoke, didn't they smoke, changed their DNA. And that is handed down through the generations. So you might have certain genes that are switched on, others that are switched off because your grandparents or your great-grandparents lived in a certain way. So I guess to come back to the point that we've nuanced our understanding of genetics to actually realize there's all these things going on around our DNA that are influencing how it expresses itself. And that's the field of epigenetics. Epi, sort of outside. So in a sense, you get dealt a genetic hand when you're born, but you get to play the hand. So we're not, in a sense, so fatalistic to say, well, I've got a family history of this, it's all over for me. It's like, well, there's a family history of this, which means it's doubly important that I exercise and eat well and do these other things so that may never actually play out in my life.
And that's where the mindfulness piece really comes in, isn't it? It's about being mindful about the choices that you're making on a day-to-day basis. Is that the connection there?
Yeah, so it's not just whether we exercise or not. It's not just what we eat, but the environment that you're in, the things that you're exposed to, but also the mind as well. So your state of mind, we actually realize now that the state of mind actually influences the way our DNA expresses itself. And which is, I don't know about you, I just find that fascinating.
Me too, absolutely.
Yeah, so, and it gives us a deeper understanding of the mechanisms, how something like significant psychological stress or mental health can mean that a person's more likely to have a whole range of chronic illnesses. So it can actually switch them on, which kind of gives us a bit of an insight as to why people with poor mental health often have poor physical health as well. Right. But that's the negative side of the story. I think it's really, really important that we kind of, well, what's the positive side of this?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the possibility?
The positive side, well, this is very empowering.
Yeah.
In a sense that, okay, well, there's a lot I can do to influence the way that my DNA is expressing itself. So there are a whole lot of things. So we change our state of mind. We create a healthy environment for ourselves. We lead a healthy lifestyle. All of these things work in a very positive way, right down to the DNA of ourselves.
And what is the role of beliefs and belief systems have in this? I mean, we talk about the mind, but I'm assuming we're talking about, beliefs and values and the way in which our identity is constructed. Does that plays a role and gets expressed through the DNA?
In all sorts of ways. I'll just give you one example of a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the States. And they're looking at a person's disposition towards happiness. Well, not a person, a whole bunch of people, but they're looking at their disposition towards happiness. And the two main dispositions are hedonic and eudaimonic. So hedonic, hedonism, that is happiness as pleasure, getting stuff.
In externality.
Yeah, get stuff, become affluent, avoid anything you find uncomfortable. And as opposed to eudaimonic, and comes from a Greek word. But anyway, happiness is meaning. And we're all human. I mean, we all have this natural disposition to enjoy pleasure and to want to avoid pain. But for the person who puts meaning first, that is, I will endure discomfort because I'm doing something that's meaningful. I'll stand on a rainy street corner rattling a tin, raising money for a charity, not because it's more pleasurable than sitting in a cafe having a pain au chocolat, and very nice, and a barista brings something to you. You're doing it because it's meaningful. And so people who have, in this study, they're looking at the genes that regulate the immune system. And there's a particular pattern to, CTRA. But anyway, they're looking at whether the genes that regulate the immune system switched towards inflammation or switched away from inflammation and healthy immunity. What they found was that those with a hedonic disposition to happiness, their DNA was switched towards inflammation and away from healthy immunity, whereas those with the eudaimonic was switched towards healthy immunity and less inflammation.
Yeah, wow.
But there's all sorts of stuff too, how like anger and hostility and so on, all of these kinds of emotional states actually switch on genes associated with inflammation. So it's interesting, there's a Sanskrit word, raga, but it's, we get words like rage, but it has various meanings like anger and attachments, but also inflammation, red, hot, and so on. And here it is, modern science and mind-body medicine says, well, you get a lot of anger and you get pretty hot.
A lot of inflammation.
Switch on your inflammation, and that anger often comes from attachment. Get really attached to stuff, and somebody threatens it, and bang, there's anger and hostility. So this is just fascinating, the way that this stuff can influence us. And when people do things like practice compassionate, which is down stress, it actually has an effect of reducing inflammation and so on. So these things work both ways. And that's why it's so important we make very conscious decisions about what kinds of emotions we really want to cultivate.
Yeah, it's what I'm really getting in that is it's happiness to generate overall health and well-being. It's this beautiful correlation between the two.
Yeah. It's and there are certain kinds of emotions that can be very, very toxic. Now, I wouldn't want to say, there's never a moment in our life where we should ever get angry. I mean, there could be a situation where it could be appropriate to be angry over something. But when we're expressing that anger in a more conscious, rational, clear, mindful way, it's a very different thing to when we're experiencing anger in a very reactive, full of attachment, kind of irrational sort of way that actually creates more damage rather than resolves a problem. And so, but these emotions, they go very, very deep. The emotions in particular, so what we think, but also importantly, really importantly, what we feel emotionally.
That emotional state and those physical feelings as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how does that, what have you seen in your research? How does that get expressed through the body? I mean, obviously that shows up in inflammation, but then where does it transcend from there? Where does it?
Yeah. And I should say what I'm doing is summarizing the research of others. So this isn't my primary research in a sense, trying to draw it together and communicate it to patients, to medical students, to doctors, to the general public, to help people use this kind of information in a healthy way. So just to come back to the question you wanted to ask again. So
how does that then get expressed? If you've let's say, for example, our listeners are busy, sometimes stressed, entrepreneurs, business leaders, having the range of emotions, possibly on a daily basis, a full range of emotions, without taking on some sort of mindfulness practice, which we're going to talk about shortly, what are the possible health ramifications for that? Like, how does that get expressed? Those emotions get expressed through the body.
Yeah. So I mentioned about the immune system, and so we know that significant stress is a factor that can trigger autoimmune conditions, where the immune system starts to attack itself and cause lots of inflammation. It increases our susceptibility to infections and colds and so on. So there's all of that kind of area. Also, our genetic risk of heart disease or cancer can be significantly increased as well. We don't know the full extent, probably more so with cardiovascular disease than with cancer, but there's more work to go on in that space. One of the most fascinating areas I find is to do with what's called telomeres. And just to give you a little bit of background, so your chromosomes are long, coiled up molecules of DNA, and they're sitting in the nucleus of your cells. And but on the end of the chromosomes are these two little caps called telomeres, and they stop your DNA from unraveling, a little bit like the plastic bits on the end of shoelaces stop shoelaces from unraveling. And the telomeres are at their longest and healthiest when we're born, right? So it's like a new shoelace. But after we're born, every time your cells divide, they get whittled away and shorter on the ends. And the shorter they get, the more the DNA starts to unravel and mutate and get damaged and so on. And the importance of it is the shorter the telomeres, essentially the older we are and the bigger the risk of the illnesses that we associate with aging, like cancer and heart disease and dementia and so on. So it's the best marker of our biological age, single marker that we really have. An Australian woman by the name of Elizabeth Blackburn won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2009 for discovering telomeres. And it's fascinating because Elizabeth Blackburn, absolute Nobel Prize winning geneticist, has been working with a professor of psychiatry, Sir Lisa Epple, and a whole team there. So what are the links between the mind and the body and how it influences your telomeres? So I look at this, and the first study they did was looking at women who are carers. These are actually mothers of children with a major chronic illness. And being a carer day in, day out, year in, year out, can be pretty demanding. But they looked at how well or poorly these women were coping with those emotional demands. And what they found was the women who were coping best, the third who were coping best compared to the third who were coping least well, those who were coping least well were 9 to 17 years older by their late 30s, on average, compared to the women who were coping best. Now, 9 to 17 years of accelerated aging, by around that age, I would have thought was quite a lot. So aging fast right down to the DNA of the cells. And they've done a whole bunch of other studies, and other people have done work like looking at workplace stress, so high levels of workplace stress and burnout, aging fast, about a decade older by middle age. It wasn't the job, it was how the person was coping with the job. That's much more important than the job itself. So a person could be doing a challenging job but thriving in it. Another person could be doing that job and absolutely distressed every day. Something like pessimism. A person with a disposition towards pessimism was about a decade older by middle age compared to a person with a disposition towards optimism. Now, mind you, if your listeners have got a disposition towards pessimism, that made them a whole lot more pessimistic right then. So what I'll say is
that's true.
Start cultivating some optimism, all right? So, but, there was an interesting study. I mean, there's been a whole range of interesting studies. So if we experience really upsetting events in our lives, or let's say challenging life events, it wasn't so much experiencing that, it was whether or not the person internalized it.
Mm.
And there's a very different thing, and this would probably be a segue too into mindfulness, that we can experience an insult, something really terrible from somebody else, and one person will not take it on board. One person will, in a sense, have their own boundaries, not take it on board, and will not carry it with them, whereas another person experiences the same kind of thing, an insult, obviously an expression of something really unkind, etc., from somebody else, but will internalize it. And of course, when we internalize it, we go over it and over it, we relive it again, so that one situation is relived thousands of times afterwards. And it was the person who internalized it that really had the negative effects on their DNA, much more than the person who experienced it, but they didn't take it on board, right? So there's a whole bunch of anger and hostility, short telomeres, high levels of day-to-day stress or allostatic load, short telomeres. So this is really important, but there's been research to show that things like mindfulness and healthy lifestyle as well actually protect your telomeres and slow down the rate of aging, which I find fascinating.
You and me both. I think it's amazing. And like you said, it is a great segue into mindfulness. What sort of practices, because we talk about mindfulness, I mean, there's a range of practices, but are there any that you found, obviously meditation being one, but is there any practices that you found to be more effective than others, or is there what could you recommend to enhance that mindfulness piece?
Well, look, when we talk about mindfulness, I suppose there's two main things we could think about. The formal practice, which is sitting in a chair, or on a cushion, meditation stool, practicing meditation, mindfulness meditation. There are a variety of meditations. Most of the research on telomeres has been done on mindfulness, but sitting down practicing meditation. But then there's the informal practice of mindfulness, and that's to be mindful as you go about your day-to-day life. And it's not really known yet how important the one is compared to the other. Do you need to practice meditation? What about if you're just mindful in your day-to-day life? Or does the meditation, do the job and just practice a meditation every day, and it doesn't matter what you're doing the rest of the time? I think it's a little bit of both. It's very hard to be mindful in your day-to-day life without practicing some mindfulness. I'll put it this way. It's not easy to be fit in your day-to-day life if you don't take a half hour out and do some exercise in the morning.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like, that formal exercise you do to train up your fitness, and then there's the incidental exercise like taking the stairs at work and everything else. Now, I think that both contribute significantly. So if you do some regular meditation practice, when you're walking down the street, from your car to a meeting, and your mind wanders into worry and rumination and starts reliving the past, and you start to project into the future and, oh, this is going to be terrible. And you're activating the whole fight or flight response, but you're walking through a park.
That's right.
Birds are singing to you. There's dappled sunlight coming through the autumn leaves. It's like, and so if we're not mindful, we're ruminating, catastrophizing. There's a term for that called default mode, but we're just off in our heads, creating dramas and sagas and everything else. And so what it means to be mindful there is to just come back to the moment. Just feel the breeze, just hear the birds, just feel the sun. The air's cool, the air's warm, whatever it might be. But just through the senses to come back to present moment reality. And if there's no reason for that fight or flight response to be there, like there is no man-eating tiger, there is no shark, then that stress response will switch itself off. Not because we're trying to get rid of it, but just because you come back to reality.
And bringing it back.
It switches itself off when it's not required.
Yeah.
And that takes all of this load off the system. And so it's that being mindful in the 23 and a half hours or whatever that you're not meditating that really matters, I think. So you need to, in a sense, put the two together, the formal and the informal practice. And that includes just being mindful in the simple moments in your life. When you're washing the dishes, just wash the dishes. Because if you're washing the dishes and thinking, I've got still another 1,000 things to do before the end of the day, how am I going to get through it all? Then all of a sudden the dishes is being experienced as a very onerous thing rather than just something really simple in your day. When you're having a shower, just have a shower. When you're eating lunch, just eat your lunch.
And that's one I was going to use as an example, the eating of food. We talk about the combination of, physical health and well-being with nutrition, but as also combining that with mindfulness and being mindful with the actual eating process.
Yeah.
As opposed to eating in order to put food in your body, in order to move on to the next task.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a simple way. I found that a very simple way of introducing mindfulness at least 3 times a day.
Yeah, so you eat mindfully. There's a whole bunch of things that happen. The first thing is you just enjoy your food more.
Yes.
Pleasure of just eating. So you enjoy your food more. And the second thing is that you're more in touch with your body. So when your body says, thanks, that's enough, you can't, oh, that's interesting, time to stop. But it also gives us a mental rest. Maybe you've got some important meeting to go to. Get out of your car, you go a 5-minute walk to the meeting. Now, if we're not mindful, we fill that 5 minutes with rumination and worry and anxiety about how it's going to go. And we don't make a conscious decision. Now, what's the best thing I can do to prepare myself for this meeting? I think I'll put in 5 minutes of rumination. I think that'll help. We don't make a conscious decision to do that.
No.
It's a low awareness habit. Now, if we're thinking, well, what would be useful to take into the meeting? You've done your preparation or whatever you need to do. You've got a 5-minute walk from your car to the meeting, and just walk mindfully. And walking mindfully means you give yourself a little bit of mental rest, but you may find that when you walk into the meeting room, you've got a calmer, more attentive state of mind to now bring to the meeting. So it's not a waste of time walking mindfully. It's cultivating a state of mind that will help you to engage with the next complex thing you need to do. And at the end of the meeting, right, now you've got a simple thing like walking back to the car, driving to somewhere else. Then that's all that's happening. So, and then you cultivate a mindful state of mind to take into the next activity. So, but if we're not mindful, we leave ourselves very vulnerable to this default thinking, rumination, worry, catastrophizing, etc. And there's a lot of that default mental activity in states like anxiety and depression and so on. And we know that mindfulness switches off those default circuits and helps the brain to become quiet but engaged again. And of course, an engaged attention is exactly what we need to be able to work effectively and efficiently in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. And what role does gratitude play in a mindfulness practice?
Yeah, like coming back to something like eating or just walking, and when we're much more open to the moment, a sense of gratitude, a sense of simple enjoyment is a much more natural state. It's so much easier to actually appreciate the simple pleasures of life, the simple, the smile that somebody gives you when you're at the supermarket and you just smile back. If we're in our heads as we're on that morning walk and my doctor's told me I need to get half an hour of aerobic exercise every day, it's another bloody thing to do, it's like get out and walking along. But if you actually walk mindfully, as you're going past someone else, and you kind of just see them and acknowledge them. And there's just this sharing of just a human moment. And so there's always this sort of gratitude, which is much more possible if we're mindful. It's a lot more difficult if we're not mindful and we're off in our heads the whole time. And then we can, of course, actually do conscious practices. And in positive psychology, they use quite a lot of this, about some really useful things like to consciously acknowledge the things that you're grateful for in the day. But we've got this sort of negativity bias much of the time where we're not noticing the positive things in our life, but we're over preoccupied with the one or two negative things that are happening. And that's where our attention goes. And of course, that's not necessarily helpful.
Yeah. I want to talk about just briefly sleep and energy levels, those things that impact one's energy and the impact that has on, I suppose, one's ability to be mindful or to catch yourself when you're in that default behavior. Because at least in my practice, I have this saying that it's the game is not to never be in default or never be distracted. The game is the speed in which you can pick yourself up or notice or observe when you're in that default behavior. And so my question is, how much impact does energy levels, one's physical and emotional energy levels, have on, really the reaction time or the speed in which you can, realize that you're in that default behavior?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will tend to notice that when feeling tired and, long, difficult day, will tend to notice that the mind is more distracted. The mind's more distractible. It's a lot easier to wander into, worries about the future or relive stuff from the past. So just because we're mindful doesn't mean that stuff is never going to arise. We're human. It does arise, but we can bring two things to that from a mindfulness perspective. The first thing is to just notice that we're human and just have a little bit of self-compassion instead of beating ourselves up again over it. So to pay attention in a mindful way means with a kind of a curiosity, a kind of self-kindness, a kind of non-reactivity, not being judgmental about it. It's like, oh yeah, that's all right. Just noticing tiredness, noticing the mind wandering there. So there can be that kind of attitude, but we do notice. But if in that moment of noticing opens up the window of opportunity to choose. Is that really where I need my attention to be right now? Because you might be standing at your kitchen bench just jiggling a tea bag and a teacup, and you kind of think, well, I could wander into that same old story that I've, etc. Or I could just make a cup of tea. So you bring your attention back to what you're doing. But there are times we need to reflect on something, and sometimes we do need to give attention to something but need to make a decision on. But if we can do it consciously and intentionally, we'll do it a lot better than if we're just wandering. But that tiredness is one of the things that happens when the body's not well physically. It tends to happen more. When we're under a lot of pressure, we'll notice the tendency for the mind to go into those spaces is a lot more common, but the noticing in a very gentle kind of way, that sort of non-judgmental, non-reactive way, but being able to give our attention to the things that we want to give our attention to, so that when we're practicing mindfulness, we get better and better at being able to do that. But just because we're mindful doesn't mean we'll never experience an uncomfortable physical, mental, emotional state anymore. But it just means that we can be with it in a different kind of way.
And really bring that self-compassion and that lightness, that gentle way of being to it.
I think that's really important because as we develop that greater awareness of ourselves, our own humanity, we're human. As we bring more awareness to that, but in a compassionate, non-judgmental way, we're not talking about being self-centered or selfish, but as we develop that compassion for ourselves, we start to notice, it's going on for other people as well. So that person at work who's a bit difficult to get along with, we just notice, you can actually see where it's coming from. You kind of, I've seen that in myself. you kind of recognize the same thing going on for others. And one of the clear signs of mindfulness going deeper into a person's life is when the person starts to notice quite spontaneously more tolerance and patience with others, more compassion for others, more understanding, a greater capacity to understand the perspective of others. And that's a sure sign that mindfulness is going deeper.
Yeah, beautiful. Really beautiful. And it's that connectedness to someone else's humanity at a human level, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Greg, you facilitate an online program which is hosted by FutureLearn through Monash University. It's quite a successful, very effective program. It's called Mindfulness for Wellbeing and Peak Performance, which kicks off again later this month.
Yeah, June 15, it goes live again. It's a free course. We developed it at Monash University, but it's on the FutureLearn platform, and they work with universities all around the world. So it goes live 3 times a year. The next time's June 15, so it's totally free. And but any of your listeners could certainly do that program if they'd like to.
Yeah, fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit about the program, what they might get, and the format and the structure?
Yeah, it runs over 4 weeks from June 15. And so there's content in terms of short videos looking at particular aspects of mindfulness related to well-being, related to how it helps you to function in your day-to-day life. So there's clips, there's things to read, there's links to other, valuable sources of information, links to other articles and deeper dive for those who want to go further. But you could do it in your own pace and your own time, so you don't have to be online at a specific time. But what's really important is the community of learners. And we're very conscious when we're developing the course that a lot of distance learning, you feel like, well, I'm just looking at a screen, just reading some content, just looking at a video. But we wanted to make sure we developed a strong community. So there's the discussion forums, and they're moderated. So we have really highly trained, psychologists who are on that every day for a couple of hours, responding to questions, challenges, helping out all the learners. But every week we get a summary as well of the key things that have come up for that week, key questions, key insights. And my colleague, Richard Chambers, and myself from Monash, we go and we film a weekly feedback video exploring those hot topics for the week. So, and that's really, I think, very helpful, for a few reasons. The support of the learners, because mindfulness is not always easy.
No.
And the support of the learners, but also it kind of, people know at the other end, there's people who are really listening to what's going on. So that course, if a person was, going through all of the elements, it'd probably be a couple of hours a week over that 4-week period, unless a person wanted to do some of the extra things. There's guided practices as well that are downloadable. And then a person has access for another 2 weeks after the course finishes to all the materials and go back and look over them. And if a person wants to pay for an upgrade, they pay FutureLearn. Monash gets a part of that, but they can get a certificate and ongoing access to the materials for all time if they want to. So, but that course and its companion course, Maintaining a Mindful Life, are the 2 top-ranked online mindfulness courses in the world, according to Class Central. So we've really been very encouraged with, the kind of, I suppose, the response from learners and how useful they tend to find it is.
Yeah. And I think I read somewhere that over 400,000 people have participated in that program.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the last run of the course, we had, I think it was 22,500 people doing it. So it's a really, and that's people from, I think, 130 different countries. So it's a really rich learning environment. It's been great to really offer something like that for free. And I've really got to take my hat off to Monash University for, throwing its resources behind something, not for the commercial side of it, just because, well, I suppose it gets the Monash name out there, but just to really provide really good resources that are freely available. It's wonderful.
Yeah, beautiful. Craig, thank you so much for not only your time in this interview, it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you on the show, but also thank you for the work that you do in the community and the difference that you make through your research and through your work at Monash University. It's every day making the world just that more mindful and that more peaceful and enjoyable. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Simon. Thank you.